Hello, this is Mario from Odeon. In this video, we will talk about what is ambisonics. Ambisonics is a full-sphere surround sound format, meaning it can fully describe any 3D sound field with its direction characteristics. This has several interesting applications. For example, it is possible to identify the direction of reflections from an ambisonic recording, and a nice way to visualize this is with an intensity hedgehog. This also means that you can calculate the lateral energy fraction. Another application is for auralization. For context, there is also binaural auralization, which is a standard auralization method. This requires a binaural impulse response, which can be recorded using a dummy head or simulated by applying a head-related transfer function in the simulation. Then, the auralization is listened to with headphones, in order to simulate physically being at the recording position with the dummy head's orientation. But auralization with ambisonics has several advantages over binaural. Ambisonic playback is not restricted to a specific number of speakers, but instead, it can be decoded for playback on any number of speakers, regardless of the number of recording channels. So, any ambisonic recording can be decoded, for example, for binaural or 2D surround listening. Also, when decoding for binaural auralization, the listening orientation can be freely adjusted, whereas using a dummy head results in a fixed listening orientation. A dummy head can be bulky to transport, whereas ambisonic microphones are highly portable. Also, a dummy head or a head-related transfer function attempt to mimic the presence of a person by introducing the delays between ears and the effect of the body on the incoming waves. But they will not match every listener perfectly, since different people have different bodies. With ambisonic reproduction over speakers, there is no assumption on the listener's body. The listener only needs to stand in the sweet spot, but is free to rotate around and listen to the sound change accordingly. This setup for ambisonic playback is in the Audiovisual Immersion Lab, located at the Technical University of Denmark. Now, we will explain the mathematical principles of ambisonics. Ambisonics is based on the concept of spherical harmonics, which in this case can be considered as a set of three-dimensional orthogonal polar patterns. The black lobes represent inverted polarity. Though, what does orthogonal mean in this context? Here, it means that each spherical harmonic represents a unique directional characteristic of the sound field, which is independent of the directional characteristics described by any of the other harmonics. This is comparable to Fourier analysis, where each frequency is a completely unique characteristic of the signal which is independent from the rest of the frequencies. So, spherical harmonics are components of directionality in the same way that frequencies are components of a spectrum. Here, we are showing up to the third order, but there are higher orders up to infinity. Ambisonics aims to record a real or simulated impulse response using spherical harmonics up to a certain order, which would require a certain number of microphones depending on the desired ambisonic order. For nth order ambisonics, at least n plus 1 squared microphones are required. For example, first order ambisonics, the lowest possible order, would record an impulse response using 0th and first order spherical harmonics. The 0th order spherical harmonic would describe the omnidirectional sound, while the first order spherical harmonics describe the sound components in the x, y, and z directions. This corresponds to what would have been measured with one omnidirectional microphone and 3 perpendicular figure-of-8 microphones at the same position. In practice, other configurations are used, for example, a set of 4 cardioid microphone capsules in a tetrahedral arrangement, known as a sound field microphone. This is one example of a sound field microphone, the Zoom H3 VR. The raw recordings from the capsules are referred to as A format, which are not yet usable for ambisonics. The A format channels are processed to obtain directional information that corresponds to the spherical harmonics, and this processing is referred to as encoding. This results in a B format signal, which is the standard format used for ambisonics. For first order ambisonics, the B format has 4 channels, named W, X, Y, and Z. The omnidirectional information is stored in channel W, while the information in the X, Y, and Z directions is stored in the X, Y, and Z channels. This already gives us a 3D description of the sound field, although somewhat blurred. Second-order ambisonics would use zeroth, first, and second-order spherical harmonics for a finer description of the sound field. This would be analogous to using narrower bins in a discrete Fourier transform. However, full second-order ambisonics would require a more complicated microphone with at least 9 capsules. Processing the B-format impulse response for playback on a specific speaker setup is referred to as decoding. A limitation of ambisonics is that the spacing between capsules determines a limited range of frequency where the encoding is accurate. At low frequencies, the signal is too similar across all A-format channels. At high frequencies, the wavelengths become short enough that spatial aliasing begins to occur, and the microphone could begin to introduce scattering. Audient can generate simulated B-format impulse responses up to the third order. And it can decode the B format for a 2D surround system, that is, a surround setup that does not involve the vertical direction. You would only need to specify your surround setup within the software before generating the impulse response. For any other speaker configuration, you can still get the impulse response in B format, but you would need to decode it yourself outside of Audient. Also, impulse responses in first-order ambisonics B format can be loaded into the measurement system. Then, having loaded a B-format impulse response, you can adjust the listening orientation within Audient for the auralization. Make sure to listen using headphones. Keep in mind that auralization features are exclusive to Audient Auditorium and Combined. That concludes this video, and we hope you have found it useful. Good luck!